Hey guys, Parfax here. Today, I'm going to bring you a Crowfall video. For those of you that have paid attention to the channel, I've done some Crowfall stuff in the past. I haven't done it recently. I've been basically mainly focusing on ESO because I've been having a ton of fun in there. But Crowfall is releasing here in July 6th, which will be just under a month from the time this video launches. And I wanted to bring you a class guide to Crowfall. Now, I've been playing Crowfall, man, since they called it Big World, which I think was 5 years ago. It's been a long time. I've played pretty much every spec in every class. I haven't played as much of the healers, but they're pretty self-explanatory, and I'll kind of go over them as I kind of run over them. And I just want to give you an overall video on what classes and what they do, and give you a little bit about each class. Okay, so we're going to first start with the champion. You can see here the champion, it has three different class types. They call them promotions. Look down there in the bottom of this little, they call it a discipline. You can see it has Alpha Warrior, Barbarian, and Pit Fighter. So the champion is your basic melee brawler. He's your two-handed wielder, your mace, he can wield maces and axes, and he's just a bruiser. Each one of these can be bruiser, but we have Alpha Warrior, which is a full damage class. It has the ability to auto crit and does insane damage, small group and big group. It is, for the most part, currently the go-to for melee group, big group, especially DPS. They really exceed at getting in and out of combat because they have some really good movement skills like leap. They do big AoE cleaves with their ultimate, which is their neck breaker. And then they have what they call massive cleave, as you can see on there. It's basically just a whirlwind. They're a very, very good class. And the Alpha Warrior is pretty much top the charts when it comes to damage. Then you have Barbarian, which is basically your CC class. It does decent damage, has a little bit more survivability, but it provides more group utility. It's also a very good class, typically used more in larger scale versus smaller scale, but it can be just fine in either. And then Pit Fighter, which is what I consider to be the best new player friendly class. It is a tank melee brawler. It has so much sustain, so much survivability, has tons of movement speed. It can get all over the place and annoy your foes and just never die. Once you master the Pit Fighter, you can be just the most annoying person on the battlefield. Now, you're going to lack some damage because you are going to be a heavy armor user, but it's going to be a great class for anybody that wants to be a melee brawler, but is a little bit scared about the survivability. The Pit Fighter is great. Next, we're going to go down to the Assassin. So you can see here the Assassin, and this is basically what you would think of as an assassin. It is your stealthy, trying to one-shot you, one combo, just trying to deal as much damage as possible while staying in stealth, or at least using stealth to get away from their targets. They don't have a whole lot when it comes to defenses for all the classes, really, but one. And I'll go over that here in a second. But it's basically an assassin through and through when you think of its playstyle. I mean, here it is. Its ultimate basically allows you to go back in stealth. It has some skills that allow you to go back in stealth. And it's just a really good solo 1v1 class. And by 1v1, I mean kill your target before they have any idea of what's going on. So you have three classes. You have a damage, a CC, and then you have Blackguard. Blackguard basically is it's really the brawler assassin. It has some lifesteal and stuff like that, so it has a lot more sustain than the other two versions, but it does lack in the damage. The assassin can put out a ton of damage. The Blackguard lacks in it, but is a very interesting class if you know how to use it. Next, we will go down to the Confessor. So we'll go over here to Elkin. So we have Confessor here. Confessor is your fire mage. Basically, it's three specs. It has Fanatic, Inquisitor, and Sanctifier. Fanatic is your basic damage dealer, mage type of gameplay. The Confessor does really shine in single target situations. They have Absolution, as you can see on there, which puts, when you put Sin on your target, which is what you'll stack when you auto attack them, you can then blow up your stacks of Sin for Absolution, and it does a crazy amount of damage. It has a little bit of AoE, a little bit of CC based in the kit. Well, I guess you have to spec into the CC now. but it's a really decent overall small scale type of class. It's not as good in large scale, but it does some crazy single target damage and it can be pretty good in the small group or really 1v1 aspect. The Inquisitor is the healer. Yes, I said it, the healer. It is a really good healer. I haven't played this spec specifically, but it's a pretty cool class from what I've seen. We've had a lot in our groups and stuff like that. And if you ever wanted to play a fire mage healer, the Confessor Inquisitor is your go-to. Then the Sanctifier. The Sanctifier has been a weird class. At one point, it was completely broken, completely overpowered, but they nerfed its range. When they nerfed its range, it really gimped the class. It's a melee fire mage. So it doesn't put out as much damage as the Fanatic. It can have a little bit more AoE than the Fanatic, but it really lacks the damage of the Fanatic, and it's melee. Now, it can wear heavy armor, which is a plus, makes it very survivable, but really lacks in the damage department, so it really doesn't see much play kind of in general. It's kind of sad because Sanctifiers were completely OP back in the day. Then they fixed a bunch of things that made the Sanctifier OP, and then they nerfed the range and kind of made it lackluster, but don't sleep on it. I've still seen people do absolutely crazy things with the Sanctifier. It can still be a lot of fun. All right, next we're going to go to Cleric, and the Cleric is one of your healing classes. The Crusader down there, we're going to start from bottom up this time, and is one of the best healers in the game. It's been a staple healer since the game launched. It's the tankiest of the healers, and they can have some tanky races as well, and I'll kind of go over the races after I go over all the classes, but it's really good. The Arbiter is the CC Cleric. It's another hybrid DPS CC. It does put out a decent amount of DPS and can put out some, you can really do some heals. You can do CC. It's really a versatile class. Doesn't really it's not really the best at anything, but it really does a lot of things decent. I guess it's probably one of the best at CC, but other classes do have CC as well. But the Arbiter is a really cool class, and if you really want to play a ranged throwing hammer kind of really beefy CC supporting class, Arbiter is absolutely amazing. Then we have Radical. Radical is your damage dealer. They were absolutely broken at one point. They still put out a ton of damage, but they're a lot squishier now than they used to be. Basically, the way you'll play a Radical is it is an auto attack based class, but you can pump up the auto attacks. You can even make your auto attacks cleave a bunch of targets, so it's great in big group as long as you can survive. And it has some really tanky classes, which can kind of help with it. The class weapon is a mace and a throwing hammer. Some classes you do have to spec into the throwing hammer, but if you get the throwing hammer with the Radical, which you're going to, it can put out some absolutely crazy damage. And if you've ever wanted to be a throwing hammer class and chaining all of your abilities off of everything, this is the class for you. I've played it. It's a lot of fun. Next, we have Duelist. Duelist, again, man, it used to have its heyday, especially the Slayer. So the Slayer is basically a dual pistol class. Now, with the Duelist just in general, you can run a one-hander and a pistol, also the rapier and a pistol. But the Slayer really excels in your dual pistol. And it's basically a class that can go stealth. It can go under walls if spec'd correctly, and can be an assassin-typed ranged killer. Like, it's not as strong anymore as it used to be. I've still seen some people do pretty decent with it. It really does probably need a few buffs, but it's a really fun class. I've played a ton of Slayer, especially when it was OP, right? But it's basically a dual pistol assassin, essentially, is what the class is. Dirge is just another brawler type of class. It wears heavy armor. It does some CC. It goes in and out of stealth as well. It's kind of a master of none again. It's not typically very good, but if you wanted to start with a duelist, but you didn't want to be super squishy like the other two classes or the other two promotions, you can go Dirge with plate armor and really get a hang of the class before you get on to the other two. Then Vanguard is your just basic assassin type playstyle, but it's a little Ganetian. A little bit different skills in the assassin. It does have the rapier. You can go double rapier, you can go rapier pistol, and those can kind of dictate which abilities you have on your bar and stuff like that. But it's a really fun, another assassin type playstyle. If you want to discuss which one you'd rather play, the assassin or the Ganetian has a little bit more movement skills. If you spec into it, you can go like under walls if you spec it, so you can get inside keeps and stuff like that where nobody else can. The Duelist does have the ability to go ranged, but does lack in a little bit of the damage from the Fae. Even though spec'd correctly, you can really do some damage on the Slayer and the Vanguard. Vanguard more than the Slayer, but still both pretty cool classes. So if you want a basic assassin type of play style, you might want to go to the assassin role. But if you want a little bit of hybrid, melee, ranged, a little bit less damage, but a little bit more tools to their kit, you'd go the Duelist. Next, Druid. Druid has 3 very different promotions. Stormcallers are the king of AoE DPS from range. They can put out so much DPS in big groups, and unlike the Radical, which puts out a bunch of range DPS as well, the Stormcallers don't need their ultimate to do it, and they can use their ultimate for extra DPS, or they can use it to kind of stay alive for a little bit longer. It's really cool class. I played a ton of it. It's great in small group. It's a little bit, I guess, less, effective in smaller groups versus bigger groups. But all of your big guilds are going to want to see Stormcallers. It's a really, really powerful class. And if you like ranged DPS, Stormcaller is pretty insane. And I know I say like that kind of thing all the time, but the Stormcaller is really good. They've been really good for a long time, and I don't see them getting nerfed anytime soon. Archdruids are a weird class. Some points they've been pretty busted. Some points they've been pretty lackluster. You can play them a couple different ways. You can play them as like a hybrid healer DPS, or you can play them kind of as like a bomb druid, where you put down a bunch of bombs and then blow them up. That's the way they were played originally. Then they made this kind of weird, like healer, like weird healing playstyle that was busted at one point. But it's kind of an interesting class. You do have to, on all 3 of these specs, you have a life and death tray. Now, if you go Stormcaller, you will lose your life tray, which is fine. You don't need it, trust me. But the Archdruid really goes back and forth between the 2 trays, and can be a pretty interesting class. These are staff wearers, or they wear the staves, and it's a really cool class. It's this hybrid healer / DPS. I haven't seen it used very much recently, but again, I haven't played in a little bit. But it's a really cool class if you're looking for that hybrid healer DPS staff user that can possibly blow a bunch of people up with bombs. An Earthkeeper is a healer. It at one point was one of the best healers in the game. It's kind of fallen out of favor. Basically, the way the Earthkeeper works is you put down a bunch of little orbs, and then your people on your team have to run into the orbs. So it's a little bit different than a regular healer. You can spec into some like straight heals, but the main healing from your kit's going to come from these balls. You'll stack them up in little piles, and your players have to actually run over them. So it can be kind of frustrating when you're the healer and you have things set up and your people just die for no reason and they don't run back to them. But it's still a pretty good class. Next, we have Knight. Knight is exactly what you would think of it. The 3 promotions are a CC class, a damage class, and a tank class. Very self-explanatory. They all do exactly what it sounds like. They have a chain pull, which can chain your enemies in. They have basically like a leap, which they can knock down your enemies. And your typical Knight tanky class. If you've played straight sword and board tanks in the past and you loved it, you will love the Knight. It is the only sword and board class. The only person that runs a shield other than the Knight is the Cleric, but the Cleric really isn't a tank. This is really the only full tank in the game at a typical sense. We'll talk more about another one of the tanks. I mean, I already saw the champion has a tank, but this is really your group tank right here. Next, their latest class, which is Frostweaver, and it is a Frost Mage. This class specializes in putting down little nodes and doing basically big frost damage. They do spec a lot more into the AoE versus single target, but you can spec them into single target. The Archmage is the leather wearer, straight damage. They also have a mechanic to where you can swap your ice into other things, which blow them up, kind of like the Arch Druid, just a little bit different. They also have the ability to, just when you deal damage, you can put different type of crystals on your gear. I should say on your character. It is a piece of gear, essentially. And it can do different things. You can have them to where like they can knock down. The Archmage has, they specialize in volatile ice, which is basically big AoE damage. And it's a really fun class. I've played a ton of Frostweaver, even though it hasn't been out that long. But it's really fun. Icecaller is your healer. It's a great healer in groups. It can heal out of group, which is pretty amazing. And then basically they put down these crystals on the ground. You stack them up, and it's basically big AoE circle heals that your group does have to come to, but you can put it in their areas. Unlike the Earthkeeper, where if people run over them in their full health, it doesn't really help your team out at all, because then they're just eating up the balls for no reason. Where this one, you know, they just come in there and they can get healed. Really cool class. If you like a different type of healer, just basically like a puddle healer where you put down little puddles and you are more stationary than the other healers, but you can definitely move. It's a pretty cool play style. And then Frostguard is another tank, but it's really of a supporty tank. It is a heavy armor where it has some knockdowns, it has some debuffs, and it really survives really well under pressure. It has one of the best ultimates in the game, which basically makes you can't die for like infinity. And it has a bunch of group utility. It's not used a ton, like you don't need a ton of them, but you do want some Frost Guards. They are really good and really fun, and they're not terrible at 1v1s as well. But if you go against a healing class, you're probably just not going to kill them. All right, next we have the Ranger, and again, this class has 3 really different playstyles. I guess the Warden and Brigand are semi-similar, but the Archer is essentially what you would think is an Archer. This class it's not the most powerful at the beginning, but once you get gear for this class is absolutely insane in small group. It can be played in large group. You don't want too many of them because it is a basically single target class, but this class will absolutely rip up the playing field. This is one of the classes I will main when this goes live, because it is just so devastating in small groups. It is by far my favorite roaming class. I haven't played the Assassin a ton, which I'm going to give it more of a try. I haven't played it in a few years, actually. But the Archer is insane small group. Their ultimate for all 3 classes is a sustain. It basically gives you lifesteal, and I think you regenerate health. It's pretty insane. It has rapid fire, which is your typical rapid fire type of play style, and we'll just shoot a bunch of arrows. But you just can't underestimate the Ranger damage once you get some gear. Once you get a quiver, once you get a nice bow, get some decent armor, this class absolutely shreds people. Also to mention, you do have a melee and ranged version, but the Archer really doesn't go into range or melee much at all. Then you have the Warden, which is widely considered right now to be the most broken class in the game. Now, mind you, when I'll say broken and stuff like that, and each class has its ups and downs, where there's good in group, bad in big scale PvP, small scale PvP. The Warden's probably the best overall class from what I've been told. It was always really good when I played it, but it kind of got outshined by stuff like the Arbiter, not the Arbiter, the Radical. But I played a lot of Warden, and the Warden can sustain really well with its ultimate. It has this skill called Trap Master, which basically means anytime you deal damage, it will put down these traps that do insane amount of damage, and people can't see the traps. And this is your trap class. The one thing that's really nice about the Warden too is it can wear mail armor, which is like your medium armor, and it has very good sustain, has very good damage. It is ranged. It does decent ranged and decent melee. It's just an overall great class and fun to play. If you're wanting to get into the Ranger, but you don't really, maybe you want to play Archer eventually, but you're kind of worried that, well, maybe the Archer is going to be, you don't want to really gimp yourself at the beginning. Go Warden. It's insane. It's different armor, but that's not a big deal because your armor decays in the game anyway. Really fun class. I recommend it to literally anybody. And then Brigand. Brigand is a stealthy shadow. It's kind of a mix of your archer and your warden. It can put down some traps. It can do some range, but it is essentially your stealthy ranger. It doesn't really exceed in anything like over the other two classes. Its traps aren't quite as good as the warden because it doesn't have the trap master passive, but it does have stealth and it can do traps and still can do range. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of like a ranger assassin-ish. So if you've noticed, we have went over all of the classes that have a stealth. The 3 stealth classes are assassin, duelist, and ranger, but the ranger's only brigand, where the duelist and the assassin, all 3 of theirs have it, but it's only brigand that has stealth for this class. But it's a lot of fun. I played it. It's a very good PvE class, along with the warden as well. Not that you do a lot of PvE in the game, but you will grind mobs and stuff like that. Next, we have Myrmidon, which is the class I've probably played the least. Essentially, this is another melee bruiser type of class. It has 3 different promotions: Titan, Conqueror, and Battle Rage. A lot like the other melees, it has a tank, a CC, and a DPS. The one cool thing about the Myrmidon is it has this skill called you do like a crash, where you can basically pump your damage up and you do insane amount of damage, but it has a crash period where you're going to have to hit some form of mitigation to mitigate the crash so you don't just kill yourself. But it's got a very high skill cap. I think the Myrmidon's the highest skilled cap class in the game. If you really play I think it's the Titan. Yeah, I think that's, let's see. It might be the Battle Rager. No. I think it's the Titan. The Titan, whichever one's the DPS one. There's a Leatherware. I can't remember. I think Titan's the DPS, Conqueror is the CC, and Battle Rager is the tank. And it can do a ton of damage. It is a semi-auto attack based class. You can stack up some bleeds. You do run Whirlwind as well. Its ultimate basically flings you around all over the place, dealing damage. It's a pretty cool class. It does have a net pull, which is essentially a chain pull similar to the Knight. But this is more of a DPS focused class versus the Knight. The Knight used to be really DPS heavy, but it got sort of nerfed in recent patches. The Myrmidon doesn't really excel in big group. It is very, very good in small group. I have a person in my guild named Tommy, and he's played a Myrmidon since I've been in the guild. And he just, in small group, he's just insane. It's not very good in large group, but it's very, very good in the right hands, small group. Then the last class we have is the Templar. The Templar has 3 different promotions. It has Vindicator, Fury, and Paladin. Again, this is it's a little bit different than some classes. You have the DPS, you have the tank / CC, and then you have the healer. The one thing about this class is this class is basically a point defender. So this class has very little mobility, but what it lacks mobility, if you come into the Templar, you're just going to die. The Templar absolutely excels against melee DPS. It is very hard as a melee person to kill a Templar, but it is hard as a Templar to kill almost any ranged DPS because it's really hard to get on them. It's really good in like heat battles and stuff like that. You can sit there. The Fury's the least used one. It's a weird hybrid where it's a tank and it does like CC, and it's the tankiest class in the game essentially because Templars have a block that you can use, which is really good because you want to use the block because one of their biggest strength is parry. A lot of the classes deal a lot of their damage off of auto attacks, where the Templar does a lot of their damage off their parries, and in order to parry, you have to block. But in order to put on block, you have to remove your movement skill or your dodge, which kind of, that's part of the reason why the Templar is so stationary. It does have some other stuff that makes it really cool. It has some circle, they call it Divine Light, that does a lot of things. Holy Warrior, that basically makes your character do true damage. It does have a gap closer, which is pretty cool, but it's still very stationary and hard to get on your targets unless you really spec for it. Vindicator is a absolute juggernaut for DPS if they're coming to you. The Vindicator has the best execute in the game. It has essentially some of the best AoE in the game if they're on you. With their parry and their divine light that goes down, it can do some crazy damage, but it has the biggest downside of being absolutely immobile because you have to keep your block up. But it does some crazy damage, and Paladin is one of the best healers in the game. It's just so tanky, heals so well. It's very good in like a melee style play style. These are all melee classes. The Templar is, and I'll kind of go back over. I think I mentioned which ones are all melee, but they are essentially a statue. If you come to the Templar is going to win 90% of the time, unless you're a Fury. The Fury, might just like get tired, and because the Fury doesn't do any damage, essentially, but it is very tanky and does a lot of CC. Where the Vindicator does a ton of damage, but lacks on survivability. The Vindicator is very good once you get gear. It can be utilized a lot better. It's another class where once it can get really good armor and survive in the fray, it can do some insane damage. But again, it's pretty stationary. So that's the classes. You have, your melee two-handed sword wearer. You have your dual wield melee kind of bruiser, but they do have a straight damage version of it too. You have a ranger. I don't know if I mentioned, but the warden is mainly melee, but you can run it both melee or ranged. I've seen a lot of people do ranged builds as well. The archer is the only class that really doesn't use their melee. Some of them will use it for like an escape, but basically a hybrid melee ranged class. The Frostweaver is all ranged. A frost mage, your typical knight. Duelist is a assassin-ish. It can be melee or ranged. Druid is a stave wearer and has some pretty cool little different promotions versus all the other classes. Cleric is a melee / ranged class. They have both as well. Confessors all range. Assassins just melee, and champions just melee. Now, I say just melee. There are some things you can do to make them have bows, but we're just going off the base kit here. So that's the classes, man. We're already at 27 minutes. Let's go over the races really quick. The Centaur, you can see here, has it's basically a horse. It has a armor break, which is really good. Has some pretty decent stats. The Elkin gives you some bonus to range. It has another movement skill called Headbutt, and it is really fast at just running because it does have the Trailblazer passive. The Fae is kind of like a flying, I guess a Fae. They can glide, they double jump, really cool. Kind of the assassin play style. A lot of people go Fae. Ganetian is the only race you can use for Duelist, and I think Knight is the Knight and Cleric. Yeah, so Duelist can only do Cleric, Knight. Essentially, it does have some pretty cool abilities. The best thing is, where's it at? It does increase your weapon damage by 8, which is really good. It does increase your food buff duration by 10%, which is, man, it does have a double jump as well. And its dodge roll is pretty clean. Not that you really care, but it has the burrow as well, like I said. Half Elf is a pretty juggernaut class or race. Has really good stats on it. It's typically, it's a mine, you can mine with it too. It's the 15 extra damage to mining. Has the Trailblazer passive as well to give you a little bit of out of combat movement speed. And it has an interesting passive that when you get knocked down, you heal for 112 per tick over 4 seconds whenever you're a victim of a knockdown, stun, root, or snare. Pretty cool. Half Giant is really, really good. Its big thing is the blood of the giant. It embraces your giant heritage, increasing your size, damage bonus, and healing bonus by 10 for 30 seconds. Also granting you damage reduction for 2 seconds. Basically, it's just a lot of the Myrmidons will use it for their crash, for that damage reduction, but it's a great offensive and defensive skill, the Blood of the Giant, and I love pretty much anything that I can run Half Giant on, I do. High Elf is your highest damage class. It gives you some crit damage. It gives you intellect. It has a chance to do more than one dodge, so whenever you dodge, it can activate another dodge, which is really good. And so basically makes this the most movement-oriented class in the game because all the dodges will equal out the same. This is the only one that can go the farthest. As you can see, it has the critical damage stat. It has elemental resistant, which is really good. It's just a really great class if you're doing, especially Magic DPS. Human is kind of lackluster, unfortunately. You do get an extra minor slot, just like the half elf. I didn't say that, but the half elf gets that as well. You take 3% reduced damage and increase the amount your power bar slot by 1. So you get an extra ability on your bar if you like it. Now, a lot of classes struggle with even putting all the abilities on their bar. So that's kind of is what it is, depending on what you are, but they are pretty slow. The Minotaur I love as well. I love this for the champion. The champion has some really good races to pick, honestly. It has Bull Rush, which is another movement skill. It has Thick Skin, which increases your resistance by 300. And then one of its best passives is grants immunity to all stun effects while from that hit you from the front. So if you're facing a target and they try to hit you with something, like a stun, not going to work. Nethari, pretty weird class or weird race. It has a pretty cool dodge, which it's a 20-meter dodge. Doesn't matter as much anymore, but it's kind of like a glide. You have increase your movement speed and stealth by 20%, even though most people still don't use Nethari for assassins. But it can make you a little bit faster if you want to make like a really fast play style. A little bit anti-crit strike, and then out of combat health regen by 20. So it's pretty lackluster in everything, essentially, but it's still a pretty cool race. Stoneborn is just a very, very tanky class. It gives you basically a bunch of tank stats, Constitution, which gives you health. It increases, it has like your blacksmithing stuff. And then you have Get Knocked Down, which is a pretty cool passive. Reduce the length of knockdowns you suffer by 2 seconds. And increase damage bonus and healing bonus by 5 or 12 seconds after suffering a knockdown. So basically just give you some damage when you get knocked down. But you also get knocked down for, less time. And then the Stone Skin's pretty good too. Harden your skin dramatically, increasing your damage reduction by 50%. And making you poison immune for 6 seconds. The cost of reducing healing done to you by 50%. So essentially just a very tanky class with the Stone Skin. Wood Elf is a pretty good healer. It has some nature resistance. It has increases your critical healing chance statistic by 5%. Increase your incoming heals by 5%. And then it has increase your out of combat movement speed. The Trailblazer passive, which is really good. So when you're running down, you go a little bit faster. Get that passive coming up. Camouflage, which is a cloak. So if you can run like Wood Elf, which is the Ranger, Frostweaver, Druid, you can run camouflage, but camouflage basically means if you stand still, they can't see you. But as soon as you move, they can see you. And then has the best dodge in the game, which is a teleport for 20 meters, but you disappear and then reappear at your location. So that was a super long video, but I went through every class, every promotion, every race, and I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll have a lot more specified videos coming out in the future if you would like. We'll have, maybe class builds or, just straight up builds for small group, big group, all that kind of stuff if that's what you would like. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time, and I'll see you in Crowfall. Peace.